smiling at her students, never realizing that the person who wanted her gone was sitting just a few doors away. The principal's plan hadn't vanished. It had only grown darker. Behind the closed doors of his office, Richard was desperate, enraged, and ready to give the order that would change everything. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about betrayal so deep it cuts through trust, through friendship, through life itself. And as the walls close in, Melissa has no idea that the people she relies on are the very ones plotting her final breath. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story will take twists you won't see coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Melissa walked through the school halls, the faint squeak of her shoes echoing on the polished floor. Students bustled past, chattering about homework and weekend plans. To them, life was ordinary. To Melissa, it was a fragile act of pretending. The strange encounter with the man who had watched her from across the street, the unnerving way he seemed to linger too long, still haunted her thoughts. She had brushed it off for the sake of her students. Her job was to give them stability, not burden them with her unease. But the quiet fear was always there, lurking like a shadow she couldn't shake. At her desk, Melissa touched her growing belly and whispered to her unborn child, "We're okay. I'll keep you safe." The words comforted her for a moment, but they didn't erase the memory of the man's stare, sharp and invasive, like he already owned her fate. What she didn't know was that just a few doors down, Richard sat in his office, locked in thought. The blinds were drawn. Papers lay scattered across his desk. But his focus wasn't on lesson plans or budgets. It was on Victor. Victor had been growing impatient. He wanted his money. He wanted action. And Richard, trembling beneath his carefully polished mask of authority, was feeling the pressure. He knew he had crossed a line that could never be undone, but fear of exposure, and fear of Melissa's truth coming to light, made him double down instead of backing away. Richard picked up the phone, his hand shaking, and dialed a number that burned in his memory. "It has to be soon," he whispered when Victor answered. His voice cracked. She can't keep walking around like nothing happened." Victor's reply was cold, steady, almost casual. "Then tell me when." Outside the office, life at the school carried on as if nothing was wrong. Melissa laughed lightly with a colleague, her smile hiding the unease she carried inside. She had no idea that her principal, her superior, her supposed protector, was plotting her end. The walls of the school, once her place of purpose and safety, were now closing in with secrets too dark for anyone to imagine. And as Richard's decision hardened, Melissa's every step unknowingly led her closer to danger. The trap was tightening, and this time, escape might not come. Richard barely slept. His nights had become long stretches of pacing his office, staring at the ceiling, or clutching the phone with Victor's number on speed dial. Every second felt heavier than the last. He had made a choice, and now the shadow of that choice followed him everywhere. Victor, on the other hand, was calm, too calm. Each time Richard called, begging for urgency, Victor's voice was steady, amused even. "You principals live in rules and routines," he drawled once. "But out here in my world, timing is everything. You'll get what you paid for, but on my clock, not yours." Richard hated the way Victor controlled him, yet he knew there was no turning back. He had handed over the money. He had spoken the words. He had given a man permission to destroy another life. Meanwhile, Melissa had begun to notice things. Little things. A man she didn't recognize parked too long outside the school gates. A stranger lingering in the grocery aisle, watching her reflection in the glass doors. She tried to brush it off as pregnancy nerves, but deep down, she felt her instincts screaming. That afternoon, she confided again in her colleague, Mrs. Anders, in the empty teacher's lounge. "I don't know, maybe it's just me being paranoid, but I feel like I'm being followed." Mrs. Anders frowned, setting down her mug. "Melissa, you're not the type to imagine things. If you feel unsafe, we should take it seriously. Tell your husband, or the police." Melissa hesitated. The word police felt heavy, dramatic. She didn't want to sound crazy. She didn't want to alarm her family. Instead, she smiled weakly and said, "Maybe you're right. I'll think about it." But she didn't act. "Not yet," That same evening, Richard and Victor met in the back corner of a grimy bar off the highway. Richard's tie was loose, his palms slick with sweat. Victor leaned in, his breath heavy with whiskey, his eyes sharp and predatory. "You're hesitating," Victor said flatly. "If you want this done, you don't get to hesitate. She's out there, living her life, while you're here begging me for certainty. If you want results, I need details. Where she goes, when she's alone, when I can make it clean." Richard swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "She leaves school around 4 most days, walks to her car alone. Sometimes later if she stays for grading. It wouldn't be hard." Victor smirked. "Good. Then it's just a matter of when." Richard nodded, but inside, his stomach turned. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had set in motion. Not just a plan, not just a transaction, but a countdown. And outside, somewhere in the growing dusk, Melissa walked her car unaware that 2 men had just sealed her fate. The clock had started ticking. Melissa's days had begun to feel off. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it, the weight of unseen eyes, the chill that crept across her skin even in the warm afternoon sun. Every time she left school, every trip to the store, every walk to her car seemed to take on a new edge. And she was right, because Victor was there. Victor had perfected the art of invisibility. He blended into parking lots, slipped behind tinted car windows, loitered at corners with the stillness of predator. From a distance, he watched her smile at students, adjust her growing belly with a gentle hand, laugh nervously with colleagues. To Victor, she was no longer a woman. She was a target, an assignment, a paycheck waiting to be collected. One late afternoon, Melissa left the school with a stack of papers clutched to her chest. The hallway was quiet. The day had bled into evening. As she stepped into the parking lot, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A man leaning against a car at the far end. She froze, heart thudding. But when she blinked, he was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Melissa forced herself into her car, locking the doors as soon as she shut them. She sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady her breathing. "It's nothing. It's just nerves," she told herself. But her gut whispered otherwise. That night, Victor followed her home for the first time. He kept his distance, his headlights dimmed, a hunter savoring the thrill of the chase. He parked half a block away, watching as Melissa carried groceries inside, pausing to smile at her husband waiting at the door. Through his windshield, Victor muttered, "You have no idea." Inside, Melissa laughed faintly, pushing away the unease for the comfort of her home. But outside, Victor sat in the dark, his cigarette tip glowing like a tiny ember of the danger creeping closer. The next morning at school, Mrs. Anders noticed Melissa's pale face and restless eyes. "Melissa, are you okay? You look exhausted." Melissa hesitated, then whispered, "I think someone's following me, but when I look, they're gone. I don't know if I'm imagining it." Mrs. Anders gripped her hand. "You're not imagining it. Something's wrong. Please don't ignore it." Melissa nodded, but fear locked her words away. She didn't know how to explain the shadow that never spoke, never touched, but never left her side. And all the while, Victor grew bolder. He was done watching from afar. Soon, he would close the distance. The shadow was ready to step into the light. The school day had ended, and the late autumn air carried a cool bite. Melissa walked briskly toward her car, clutching her tote bag, her eyes darting across the lot the way they always did now. She told herself she was being paranoid, but her pulse didn't believe it. This time, though, someone was there, a tall man in a dark jacket, leaned casually against the hood of the car parked beside hers. He looked up as she approached, smiling in a way that was meant to be disarming, but instead made her stomach twist. "Evening," he said, his voice deep, smooth. "Cold out tonight, isn't it?" Melissa froze mid-step. He didn't look like a parent, not like a teacher. Something about him was wrong. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice clipped. He chuckled softly, shrugging. No, just waiting on someone. I think my niece goes here. Figured I'd say hello. You're a teacher, right?" Melissa gripped her keys tighter. "Yes, I am, but visiting hours are over. You should probably check in with the office if you're waiting for a student. For a moment, his eyes sharpened, cold, assessing, but then the smile returned, thin and calculated. Of course. Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You just look kind, like the kind of teacher kids don't forget. Melissa's heart hammered. She muttered a polite, "Thank you," slipped into her car, and locked the doors immediately. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled with the ignition. Out the corner of her eye, she saw him step away, his hands in his pockets, strolling off as though he had all the time in the world. But the encounter clung to her. He hadn't asked for directions. He hadn't named his niece. He hadn't looked lost. He had looked interested. Too interested. Melissa drove off quickly, her eyes glued to the rear-view mirror. For a stretch of road, she was sure the same black sedan lingered behind her, headlights low, steady, never passing. Her breath caught. And then, just like before, it was gone. That night, she told herself it was nothing, just another stranger, just nerves. But deep down, she knew better. This wasn't random. He was watching. He wanted her to know he existed. Across town, Victor sat in the sedan, smirking. He could still feel her fear vibrating in the air between them. The first contact had been made, and the game had begun. "Next time," he muttered, "she won't walk away so easily." Melissa sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of the TV in the living room, where her husband, David, sat half watching the news. She had tried to shake off the encounter in the school parking lot, telling herself it was just a stranger being awkward, but the look in that man's eyes kept replaying in her head. The way his smile hadn't quite reached them, the way he had studied her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. Finally, she couldn't keep it in anymore. She walked into the living room, her voice unsteady. "David, can we talk?" He muted the TV and looked up, concern flickering across his face. "Of course. What's wrong?" Melissa sat down beside him, clutching her hands together, so tightly her knuckles turned white. "There was someone in the parking lot after school today." David's brow furrowed. "A parent?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "At least, I don't think so." He said he was waiting for his niece, but he didn't know her name, and he wasn't carrying anything. He just stood there, watching me. David leaned forward, his protective instinct kicking in. "Did he touch you? Threaten you?" "No, but he knew I was a teacher. He said I looked kind, like he'd been watching me." Her voice cracked. "I can't explain it, David, but it felt wrong. Like he wasn't there by accident." Her husband's jaw tightened. "Melissa, you should have told me right away. You need to report this. If he's hanging around the school, that's dangerous. Not just for you, but for the kids." Melissa bit her lip, tears stinging her eyes. "I don't want to overreact. I already feel like people think I'm being paranoid. First the car I thought was following me. Now this, what if it's all just in my head?" David reached out, gripping her hand firmly. "Hey, don't do that to yourself. Your instincts are telling you something's off, and I trust them. Promise me you'll talk to the school security tomorrow. And maybe it's time we start looking at getting some cameras here at home too." Melissa nodded, though her stomach churned with unease. Part of her wanted to believe David's calm, rational tone, that she was safe as long as he was near. But another part of her couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's words had been more than idle small talk. Upstairs, as she tried to sleep, she replayed the moment again and again. The smile, the eyes, the casual menace behind the polite words. And a single thought echoed through her mind like a drumbeat. He'll be back. Victor sat alone in his truck, headlights off, the faint glow of a cigarette the only light in the darkness. He had followed Melissa home that evening, watched her disappear safely into the warmth of her house, the porch light snapping on like a shield. He hated that light. It made him feel exposed. His phone buzzed. Richard. He let it ring twice before answering, his tone casual, though his pulse jumped. "Yeah." On the other end, Richard's voice was tight, almost trembling with barely contained frustration. "What are you doing, Victor? It's been weeks. Weeks. You told me this would be quick. Victor blew out smoke, deliberately slow. These things take time. You don't just walk up and make it happen. She's got people around her. A husband, colleagues, neighbors. One wrong move and I'm done. You're paid to take risks, Richard snapped, his voice rising. I gave you $2,500. My whole savings. I want results. Do you understand? She needs to be gone. Now. Victor smirked in the darkness, even as he felt the pressure tightening around him. Richard had no idea what taking someone out really meant. How patience was just as much a weapon as a knife he carried in his pocket. I understand, Victor said coolly, but you don't rush this kind of thing. You rush, you get sloppy. And sloppy means prison. You want her gone, you let me work my way in. Richard was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice cracked, betraying the fear under his bravado. She's ruining everything. My job, my reputation. If she keeps this up, my whole life falls apart. Do you get that? I can't wait forever. Victor, do it soon, or I'll find someone else who will. Victor's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being threatened. Not by Richard, not by anyone. He let the silence hang for a beat, making Richard sweat on the other end. Then he said, his voice low and dangerous, you don't scare me, but if you want this done right, you'll shut your mouth and let me do it my way. The more you push, the more noise you make. You want noise, Richard? Noise gets us both caught. Richard swallowed audibly. Fine, but this week, Victor, I mean it, this week. The call ended. Victor stared at the phone for a long moment, then flicked the cigarette out into the night. He could feel Richard's panic creeping into his own veins, making his job more urgent, more volatile. As he sat there, a new thought formed, sharp as glass. Maybe it's time to stop watching. Maybe it's time to test how much she fears me. And somewhere inside, he relished the idea. Victor woke before dawn, the world still and small. He liked mornings. Nobody expected a predator to be awake at sunrise. He brewed coffee in the chipped thermos he kept in his truck and watched the neighborhood wake. Mail trucks, joggers, a father corralling kids to a minivan. To them, he was invisible. Perfect. He had stalked her from afar for weeks, learned the cadence of her life like a song he could hum in his sleep. Every turn, every porch light, every casual wave from a neighbor was a data point, but observation had been a prelude. Now it was time for contact without contact, to be seen but tolerated, to be close and still a shadow. His first move was small and deliberate. He bought a cheap folding lawn chair and set it beneath the sycamore near the school's front path. From there, he could watch foot traffic without appearing odd. An old man reading a paper, a neighborhood watcher. Twice he coached his face into mild expressions, puzzled, kindly, forgetful. On the third day, Melissa noticed him in profile as she walked the kids out to the buses. She frowned, only briefly. To her, an added presence in the mornings was a harmless curiosity. To Victor, it was a probe with promising results. Next, he escalated in ways that would seem ordinary to anyone else. He volunteered at the Saturday book drive, an event Melissa helped run. He signed his name on a clipboard as Victor Lane. He showed up early, carried boxes, joked with parents. He didn't hover near her. He simply existed in the same space where her back was often turned. When she passed him a stack of coloring books, his fingers brushed the edge of her hand. It was accidental in the world's eyes. It registered in hers as a prickle of unease. Inside him, the shift felt electric. Up close, he cataloged her habits. The slight hitch when she laughed at a child's joke, the way she tucked hair behind her ear when thinking, the habit of rubbing her belly while reading aloud. He drank these small details like a man starving. That same week, he began manipulating routine. He learned which day the cafeteria emptied last, which hall light flickered when no one was there, which janitor worked the late shift. He timed his crossings so their paths overlapped when chances of witnesses were smallest. He sent a bouquet to the wrong classroom. Simple logistics error, he'd say later. Ensuring he'd appear at the door to apologize. He made himself familiar. Melissa's unease grew teeth. She snapped at a student at recess and immediately felt guilty. the pressure of fear sharpening into irritability. At home, she woke at 3 in the morning with a panic she couldn't name. David noticed the small changes, her jumpiness. The phone clutched like a lifeline on the nightstand. He called the school and left a message. Check security footage. Please. For Melissa. But the cameras, the protocols, the logic, none of it stopped Victor. He didn't need to break locks when he could bend people with presence. He smiled for the PDA, exchanged pleasantries with the secretary, and volunteered to help hang autumn banners in the auditorium, the very spot where Melissa would rehearse a new reading for her students that week. On the day he set the ladder, he positioned it under the spotlight of the stage. He stayed where the light hit, making himself visible as she walked by. Melissa paused, met his eyes, and for the first time since the parking lot, looked truly afraid. His smile was still the same thin, polite one, but his internal voice was a whisper. Soon, outside, a siren passed, a distant, ordinary sound that cut through the afternoon like a metronome. Time kept moving. People moved through their lives, unaware their paths had been altered. Victor moved closer, measured and inexorable, the distance between intent and action shrinking with every voluntary smile. Melissa was unraveling. At school, she kept her composure for children, her smile steady, her voice warm, but underneath, fear gnawed like a steady drumbeat. Every corner of the building felt haunted by him. The man who had first been a stranger outside now seemed woven into the fabric of her daily life. The staff lounge was no longer a refuge. She'd enter, carrying her tea, only to find Victor already there, chatting politely with custodian or flipping to the bulletin board notices. When their eyes met, he'd nod casually, as though his presence was nothing unusual. To everyone else, he was just a helpful volunteer. To Melissa, he was a shadow that wouldn't leave. At night, the weight followed her home. David noticed her trembling hands as she grated papers at the kitchen table. He'd press her gently. Melissa, this is getting worse. You can't just ignore it. But what could she say? That she felt hunted but had no proof? That the man smiling at her in broad daylight was plotting something darker in the silence? Sleep betrayed her. She woke often, heart pounding, after dreams where she was being chased through the empty halls of the school. Sometimes she'd hear a knock, faint and deliberate, at the window, only to find nothing there but her own reflection. David tried to reassure her, but even his arms couldn't smother the rising sense of inevitability. Meanwhile, Richard was losing patience. In his office, he met Victor again under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The stacks of paperwork around him couldn't hide the tension that filled the air. What's taking so long? Richard hissed, voice sharp, his control fraying. Victor leaned back, calm in a way that infuriated Richard. These things take time. You don't rush precision. Richard slammed a fist onto the desk, paper scattering. Time isn't something I have. She's still here, every day, smiling like nothing's wrong. If you don't finish this soon, you'll regret it. Do you understand? For a moment, silence stretched, taut as wire. Then Victor leaned forward, his voice low, almost amused. You think I answer to you, Richard? I don't. I'll act when I'm ready. But don't worry, he let the pause linger, his eyes glinting in the half-light. She won't see it coming. Richard's anger simmered, but fear flickered underneath it. He had chosen Victor for his precision, his control, but now he realized he had unleashed something even he couldn't rein in. Back at home, Melissa clutched her husband's hand as they double-checked the locks. The air thick with an unspoken truth neither wanted a voice. The danger wasn't gone. It was circling closer, and as Victor tightened his net around her, appearing where she least expected, moving closer each day, Melissa felt the walls of her life narrowing, suffocating. Somewhere deep down, she knew the moment of confrontation was no longer a possibility. It was a promise. The week dragged forward like a nightmare Melissa couldn't wake from. By now, Victor's presence was more than coincidence. He wasn't just lurking. He was orchestrating. Each day, his appearances crept closer, more deliberate, like a predator circling prey. One morning, Melissa arrived at school early, hoping to find peace and stillness before her students arrived. But as she unlocked her classroom, She felt it, that prickle on the back of her neck. She turned, and there he was, standing at the far end of the hall, his figure framed in the dim glow of the overhead lights. He didn't move. He just watched. Melissa's hand froze on the doorknob. Her breath caught in her throat. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her attempted strength. Victor smiled faintly, tilting his head. "Just making sure everything's safe around here. You never know what can happen when people let their guard down." The words weren't a threat, not directly, but the way he said them made Melissa's blood run cold. That night, she broke down at home. Her husband, David, found her curled on the couch, tears soaking into the cushions. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "He's everywhere, David. I feel like I'm losing my mind." David pulled her close, his jaw tight. "You're not losing your mind. This isn't in your head. He's crossing lines, and I won't let him hurt you." He reached for his phone. "We're going to police." But Melissa hesitated. The fear wasn't just of Victor. It was of being dismissed, of people thinking she was paranoid. What if the police saw him as nothing more than a school volunteer or a harmless stranger? What if her complaint only made things worse? Across town, Richard was unraveling. Each day Melissa remained alive was another day his plan teetered on the edge of collapse. He stormed into the hidden corner of the diner where he and Victor often met, his face flushed with fury. "You're dragging this out too long," Richard spat, slamming an envelope of cash onto the table. "Do it now. Tonight. No more games." Victor didn't flinch. He lifted his coffee cup, sipping slowly before replying. "You don't get to dictate the when. That's not how this works." "Don't forget who's paying you," Richard snapped. Victor's expression hardened, his calm turning to ice. "And don't forget who's doing your dirty work. If I go down, you go down with me. Do you understand?" For the first time, Richard faltered. The balance of power had shifted. He had started this plan believing he was in control, but now, sitting across from Victor, he realized he had unleashed something far darker than his own ambition. That night, Melissa lay awake, the shadows of the room stretching long and menacing. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, felt like a warning. She clutched her stomach, her unborn child stirring within, and whispered through tears, "Please, let me keep you safe." But outside, somewhere in the darkness, Victor was planning. His patience had reached its end. The breaking point was here. The night air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that presses against the chest. Melissa had stayed late at school, grading papers under the hum of fluorescent lights. The building was nearly empty, its corridors hollow, echoing with each step she took. She told herself she wasn't afraid. She told herself she had imagined Victor's stare, his footsteps, his voice whispering threats between the lines of ordinary words. But deep down, her body knew the truth. Her hands shook as she gathered her things, her heart thudding with urgency she couldn't suppress. As she pushed open the side door, the chill of spring air struck her face. And then she froze. Victor was waiting, leaning casually against the brick wall. He looked as though he had been there forever, watching. His shadow stretched long under the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. "Working late again," he said softly, stepping forward. His tone was calm, almost friendly, but Melissa could hear the sharpness beneath it. Her breath caught. "Leave me alone, Victor," she managed, her voice trembling. But Victor only smiled. "I can't do that. Not yet." He stepped closer, and Melissa's grip tightened on her bag. Her instinct screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She thought of her students. She thought of David. She thought of the child she carried. The child who hadn't even been given a chance. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the far end of the lot. David. He had come to walk her home. Victor's expression shifted, the calm mask cracking. He glanced at David, then back at Melissa, and for the first time, she saw hesitation flicker in his eyes. "Another time," he muttered, melting back into the shadows before David could reach him. Melissa collapsed into her husband's arms, her sobs breaking the night. David held her tightly, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Across town, Richard sat alone in his office, the clock ticking louder with every passing second. His hands trembled as he poured himself a drink, realizing the truth. He had lost control of everything. Victor wasn't just his weapon anymore. He was his reckoning. Melissa didn't know it yet, but the storm was far from over. Victor had retreated, but only to plan. Richard had grown desperate, but desperation makes